we're so accustomed to these things in the circles that you and I and your listeners move in, that we would call them dimensions, okay? So that's one way of thinking about it. Physically, you might think of it as a dimension, a space in which one might move. In terms of energy, you might think of it as a density, in terms of the density of consciousness, the vibration of that consciousness. So a first density consciousness, for example, might be a plant or a rock, or an element, a piece of iron under the ground, or a piece of copper or something. A second density consciousness might be an animal. And a third density consciousness, of course, would be typically human beings. And that represents a state of awareness. And it's not necessarily better than a rock or a mountain lion, our consciousness. It's just different. It's a different oscillation. It's a different frequency. And the natural movement is to fully map each dimensional space and each density and continue on our journey from the first through the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth to the seventh. And as we go, certain things have to happen before you cross the threshold to the next dimensional space. So one of the key lessons of the third density consciousness is conscience, to use the Victorian language, or in modern day language, integrity. And one's integrity and one's ability to be impeccable in one's dealings with the world and oneself, that has to come to a very high level before consciousness goes to a 4D space. Now, it can happen that certain entities go into that space not having fully mapped that, and that's therefore where they stay. So some people, in my view, people, not the right word, some intelligences scrape through, cheat on the exams and scrape through into the 4D space, and we might call them some of the negative extraterrestrial entities, to use that terminology, for example. And to say extraterrestrial, you immediately create this dichotomy of humans and aliens, but I see it as there's such an extraordinary diversity of life. It's rather like if dogs could rule the world, and they would say, well, is it dog or is it not dog? And that would like completely ignore all the billions of different species that are out there and the different types of consciousness. It's the same for us. So there are like Atlantean and mythological nature spirits, Greys, Orions, Arcturans, Draconians, all these different things that operate in a fourth dimensional density. When you go up from that, you cannot increase that unless you are basically operating from what, again, in modern terms, we would call a heart center, where there is a implicit understanding that we have to operate not only in service to self, but also in service to others. And that's a very smooth dynamic. So in the fifth dimensional space, you get like the Pleiadian entities, for example, who are advanced in terms of the time they've spent going through these grades, these schools, these universities of consciousness, and have achieved such a fineness and such a delicate equilibrium in what they're doing that they are given creational abilities. So the 5D is where you first encounter creational power, in that you can create from nothing. You don't just transform energy from one form into another, which is a 3D paradigm. From the 5D, you can create. Now, when we go to the 6th and the 7th, we're moving into such uncharted territory of the 6th being pure light beings, the 7th being celestial creative beings, that it's difficult to talk about, quite frankly. Even to go to the 5D is an extraordinary feat for any three-dimensional human mind to do while they're here. What we're concerned with is the relationship between the 3D and the 4D. So as spiritual people, that's what we're looking at. And that is what is happening at a global scale at the moment, that those who are purely invested in the 3D are in for some trouble, because the Earth itself, the galaxy itself, is shifting into a higher oscillation of consciousness. And everybody moves up one level. So the animals will become given the opportunity to become human, if you like, or given the opportunity for Homo sapien-like humanoid consciousness. Humans are given the opportunity to shift, to go to a higher dimensional space physically, and a higher density of consciousness at an energetic level. And that shift happens every 24, 25,000 years. And we're just, as everybody is probably quite aware, on the edge of one of those cycles now. And it is actually happening right now if you know how to look and if you know how to see. And that is something that affects everybody all the time. But those invested totally in the concrete material world of objects and tables and chairs, they can't see it because their consciousness is operating at a very low level. It's vibrating at a very low level. And that's okay, but it will mean they will not have the opportunity to shift, and they will be kind of like recycled, to put it in a slightly humorous way. So consciousness can never be destroyed. Everybody's safe in the end. It's just a matter of how willfully and how smoothly and elegantly we move on our journey. Nobody really loses out, no one, but some move at different speeds than others.
Neil, we're actually at the end of the show, and that's actually a really, really good place to finish because you've summed it up just beautifully in that last few words. And I really appreciate your time today. You've done a wonderful job in 1 hour of explaining a great deal of the mystery, and I really, really appreciate your time today. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed talking to you, and I hope the listeners enjoy it.
Oh, I'm sure they have. Lots to ponder and think about. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
So my guest next week is Scott Onstott, who's been talking about secrets in plain sight, and many of the structures that we were really talking about today with Neil behind the scenes, and how they have been used both positively and negatively to keep us trapped and provide the opportunity to awaken to our consciousness. Hope you've enjoyed today's show. Have a great week. This is Peter Tung for Awakening to Conscious Co-Creation.
We hope that you found this week's show to be enlightening and inspiring. Please join host Peter Tung for another edition of Awakening to Conscious Creation next Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, noon Pacific Time on 7th Wave Network.